flashing lights, a routine traffic stop until it wasn't. James Carter, a well-dressed black man, was driving home from work when he saw red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. He pulled over, calm and collected, expecting nothing more than a standard check. But the moment Officer Reynolds stepped out of his squad car, the air changed. His tone was sharp, his eyes filled with something James had seen too many times before: prejudice. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Reynolds asked, his hand already hovering near his holster. James kept his hands visible, following every rule. "Just heading home, officer." But Reynolds wasn't listening. One wrong move, one wrong word, and suddenly things escalated. A shove, a fist, a split second of unchecked power. What Reynolds didn't know: James wasn't just another driver. He was an FBI agent, and this so-called routine stop was about to take a turn no one saw coming. James staggered back, his face stinging from the unexpected blow. His mind raced, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what just happened. He had been through intense FBI training, worked undercover in dangerous situations, but never did he expect to be assaulted for simply existing. Officer Reynolds towered over him, his grip tightening around his baton. "Hands behind your back. Now." James took a slow breath, his instincts telling him to stay calm. "I need you to think carefully about what you're doing, officer." His voice was firm but measured. Reynolds scoffed. "Oh, you think you're a tough guy, huh?" James could see it in his eyes. This wasn't about the law. This was personal. The officer hadn't even asked for his ID. He didn't know who he had just put his hands on. But he was about to find out, and when he did, everything would change. James held his ground, his heart steady despite the adrenaline surging through his veins. He knew the rules, he knew the law, but none of that seemed to matter to Reynolds. The officer was locked in his own narrative, one where James was just another suspect, not a federal agent with more authority than he could imagine. Another officer stepped out of the patrol car, younger, uncertain. "Reynolds, maybe we should." Reynolds shot him a glare, cutting him off. "Stay out of it." He turned back to James. "Turn around, hands on the car." James exhaled, his patience wearing thin. "Officer, I'm reaching for my badge," he said slowly, "in my jacket pocket." Reynolds smirked, not even listening. "Sure you are." His hand reached for his cuffs. But before he could lock James into a decision he'd regret, another voice cut through the night. "Step away from him. Now." The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Reynolds froze, his grip still tight on his cuffs. His confidence wavered for the first time. The voice had authority, a weight that couldn't be ignored. James didn't move, his hands still open, still controlled. But inside, he knew the shift had begun. The second officer hesitated, glancing between Reynolds and the newcomer. A man in a dark suit stepped forward from an unmarked car, his badge glinting under the streetlights. "I said step away." His voice was calm but carried a warning. Reynolds' jaw clenched. "This isn't your scene," he shot back. The man took another step. "It is now." He nodded toward James. "Special Agent Carter, are you all right?" Silence. The younger officer's eyes widened. Reynolds' face drained of color. James finally moved, slowly pulling out his own badge and holding it up. "I tried to tell you," James said, his voice steady, "but you never asked." The weight of the moment hung thick in the air. Reynolds' hand dropped from his belt, but the damage had already been done. The question now wasn't if he'd regret his actions, it was how far the consequences would go. Reynolds' eyes darted between James and the man in the suit, panic flickering beneath his tough exterior. He had just put his hands on a federal agent. There was no talking his way out of this. But before anyone could speak, the radio on his shoulder crackled to life. "All units, we have a priority alert. Suspect at large in the area, armed and dangerous." James and the agent exchanged a look. This wasn't just any alert. It was coded, one used for high-level threats. The younger officer stepped forward. That's just a routine. No, James cut in. It's not. He turned to the agent. It's him, isn't it? The man nodded grimly. We've been tracking him for weeks. Reynolds swallowed hard. What the hell are you talking about? James turned back to him, his calm exterior unshaken. While you were focused on me, the real threat just slipped through your fingers. Reynolds' face twisted in confusion, but James had already moved past him, his focus shifting to the real danger. The agent in the suit pressed a finger to his earpiece. Suspects spotted 3 blocks east. Armed, moving fast. James didn't hesitate. Let's go. The other officer looked at Reynolds, unsure. We should back them up. Reynolds stood frozen, processing everything, the mistake, the consequences, the fact that while he was profiling an innocent man, the real threat had slipped through. But now wasn't the time for pride. Gritting his teeth, he nodded. Let's move. They jumped into their cars, sirens blaring. James and the agent took the lead, tracking the suspect's last known location. The streets blurred past until there, a shadow darted into an alleyway. James jumped out first, gun drawn. FBI. Hands up. The suspect turned slowly, a smirk on his face. James' stomach dropped. Reynolds' radio crackled. Be advised, the suspect is a former officer. Everything clicked. The tension, the coded alert. The real reason James was pulled over. Reynolds' face paled. I know this guy. The suspect's smirk widened. Yeah, you do. The alley fell silent, tension thick in the air. James kept his stance firm, his gun steady. The suspect, once a cop, now a fugitive, lifted his hands just enough to keep them guessing. You always were quick to pull the trigger, he said, his voice laced with something between arrogance and regret. Reynolds swallowed hard. This wasn't just a criminal. This was someone he once trusted. And now, the lines between right and wrong, loyalty and justice, blurred before his eyes. James didn't hesitate. It's over. The agent in the suit stepped forward, cuffs in hand. Drop the act. You're done. The suspect sighed, lowering his hands. The moment the cuffs clicked, the weight of the night settled. As Reynolds turned back to James, words failed him. But James didn't need them. He had already seen the truth. Sometimes, justice isn't just about catching criminals, it's about opening eyes.